Close your eyes for just a moment, if you are able, or let your gaze soften. Rest on a single point in the room, something still and unremarkable. A candle, perhaps, or the glow of a lamp. The night outside is quiet, and the world feels smaller now, folded in on itself. That is the right kind of stillness for a story from long ago. A story of a man alone by the sea, tending a flame that kept the darkness from swallowing the shore whole. Imagine, if you will, a coastline that has not changed for nearly 2,000 years. The same salt breeze, the same rhythm of waves that collapse and sigh against the rocks. But there is no town in sight, no harbor light, no hum of distant traffic. Only the black sea and the black sky, stitched together by stars that seem to lean in, curious, watching. And there, on a narrow headland, or on a small island just offshore, stands a tower. Not a grand tower, not like the famous pharaohs of Alexandria that rose hundreds of feet into the air with a mirror that could be seen for miles. No, this is a practical tower, modest but stout, built of local stone and plaster, maybe 30 or 40 feet tall. At its top, a small room open to the wind on 3 sides, and inside that room, a fire. Not a roaring bonfire, but a carefully tended flame, fed by oil, burning inside a clay or bronze lamp, its light reflected and magnified by a polished metal disc, a rudimentary mirror. This is the Roman lighthouse, and the man who keeps the flame is its keeper. His name is lost to us. He might have been a retired legionary, a freedman given a quiet duty, or a slave trusted with a task of great responsibility. The records that survive do not mention him by name, but we know he existed because the Roman Empire strung lighthouses like beads along its coasts, from Britannia to Syria. Every major port had at least one, and many dangerous stretches of coastline had smaller towers, watchtowers really, that doubled as beacons. And each one had a keeper, a man whose life was measured not in hours, but in the intervals between refilling the lamp, trimming the wick, polishing the mirror, watching the weather. His day was the night. While the rest of the world slept, he climbed the narrow stone stair, his steps worn smooth by generations of feet before his, and he settled into his post. The room at the top was small, perhaps 8 feet across. A stone bench, a wooden chest for supplies, a brazier for warmth in the colder months, and the lamp, his charge. The lamp was the center of everything. Its light had to be steady, not too bright to waste oil, not too dim to be missed. He knew the exact angle to set the mirror for each wind direction. He knew how to read the sky for approaching storms, how to judge the distance of a ship's lantern from the flicker on the water. He was not entirely alone. He might have had a dog, a mangy cur that curled at the base of the tower and barked at crabs. He might have had a small garden, a patch of herbs and vegetables tucked into the lee of the tower, protected from the salt spray. He might have had a fishing line, caught his dinner from the rocks. But for most of the night, there was only the sea and the sound of the sea, and the repetitive, almost meditative work of tending the light. The Romans called the lighthouse a pharos, after the great one in Alexandria. But the keepers had their own words for it. Some called it the watchtower, the spocula. Others called it the fire tower, the turris ignes. And every keeper knew the same quiet fear, that the light might go out on his watch. It was not a fear of punishment only, though the penalties could be severe. It was a deeper fear, a sense of responsibility for the lives of those at sea. In the dark, a ship without a beacon could drift onto the rocks, and the keeper would hear the timbers splinter in the morning, would see the wreckage wash ashore. That is a heavy thought to carry, alone, in the small hours. So he checked the lamp every few minutes, not because it needed it, but because checking it was a ritual that kept the fear at bay. And what did he do to pass the hours? He listened. The sea has 1,000 voices in the night, a hiss of foam on pebbles, a deeper boom where the waves hit a cave, the high, thin cry of a gull that has lost its way. He learned to distinguish the sound of a ship from the sound of the wind, a sail flapping, a rudder groaning, a distant shout carried across the water, then lost. He would stand at the edge of his little room, the breeze tugging at his tunic, and he would strain his eyes into the darkness, looking for the pinprick of a ship's lantern. And then he would tend his own light, make sure it was bright, make sure it was seen. The loneliness was a constant companion, but it was not a cruel loneliness. It was a spacious one. There was room to think, to remember, to dream. He might have recited poetry he remembered from the market square, or songs he heard in the taverna before he took this post. He might have counted the stars, named the ones he knew. Venus, the evening star that came and went like a promise. The Pleiades, clustered like a string of pearls. Orion, the hunter, striding across the southern sky. He might have prayed to the gods of the sea, Neptune, or to the Lares, the household gods he kept in a small shrine at the foot of the stairs. A pinch of incense, a muttered phrase, a small comfort. There were visitors sometimes, not often. A fisherman might bring him a fresh catch, a loaf of bread, a jug of wine, in exchange for the light that guided him home. A passing merchant might stop to leave an offering at the shrine, a coin, a flower, a prayer for safe passage. The keeper would accept these gifts with a nod, with a word of thanks, and then they would be gone, and the silence would settle again, thicker than before. But the silence was never truly silent. There was always the sea. The sea was his clock, his calendar, his conversation. The tide told him the hour. The phases of the moon told him the week. The storms told him the season. He lived in a world of cycles, of repetition, of eternal return. And in that world, the loneliness became something else, a kind of clarity, a stillness that could feel like peace. It was not always peaceful, of course. A storm could turn the tower into a prison. The wind would howl, the rain would lash, and the sea would rise up, almost to the base of the tower, sending spray high enough to wet the lamp. Then the keeper would have to shield the flame with his own body, crouch over it, feed it oil from a reserve that he guarded like a miser. He would not sleep that night. He would not even sit. He would stand, braced against the stone, and wait for the storm to pass, and he would talk to the lamp as if it were a living thing. "Hold on," he might whisper, "just a little longer. The ships are depending on us. And when the storm passed, and the sky cleared, and the sea became a sheet of glass, he would step out onto the narrow gallery that wrapped around the top of the tower, and he would breathe the clean air, and he would feel a quiet pride. He had kept the light. He had done his duty. The ships would come home, but most nights were not storms. Most nights were ordinary. The stars turned slowly overhead. The lamp glowed steadily, and the keeper, alone in his small room, did what humans have done for as long as there have been nights. He waited. He watched. He let his mind drift. Perhaps he thought of a woman he had loved, or a child he had left behind, or a city he would never see again. Perhaps he thought of nothing at all, letting the rhythm of the waves empty his thoughts until there was only the light and the dark and the moment between them. That is the heart of this story. Not the engineering of the lighthouse, though that is fascinating. Not the politics of the Roman Empire, though that is rich. But the quiet human experience of a man alone with a flame, keeping watch while the world sleeps. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear him. The scuff of his sandals on the stone, the soft click of the oil flask, the whisper of the wick, the sigh he lets out when the dawn finally comes and the need for the light passes, and he can go down the stairs to his small cot, pull a rough blanket over himself, and sleep with the sound of gulls in his ears, knowing that he has held the darkness at bay for one more night. Now, let us draw a little closer to that tower and to the life of its keeper. There are details the history books do not record, small things, intimate things that we can imagine because they are true to the nature of any such vigil. The way he arranged his supplies, the superstitions he carried, the unexpected visitors who came not by sea, but by land, travelers on the coastal road who saw the light and turned aside, seeking shelter, and the strange, almost mythical creatures that populated the edges of his world, the things he saw or thought he saw in the flickering shadows. We will walk the same path he walked, climb the same worn stairs, sit in the same small room, and feel the same breeze off the sea. We will listen to the same stories, the ones he told himself to stay awake, and the ones the sea told him, if you can believe that the sea tells stories. It does. It tells them in the foam and the driftwood, in the bones of the ships that have fallen asleep on the floor of the deep. But first, let us linger on the threshold. The night is young. The keeper has just lit the lamp. The sun has dipped below the horizon, and the last, bruised colors of twilight are fading into indigo and black. He stands at the parapet looking out, and he is not yet tired. The hours stretch ahead of him, full of possibility. He does not know what the night will bring. A calm passage, a sudden squall, a visitor, a ghost, all are possible, and he is ready. Take a breath. Let it out slowly. The flame wavers, then steadies. The sea sighs, and we step forward into the world of the Roman lighthouse keeper, where time moves at a different pace, and the quiet is a living thing. Take a breath. Let it out slowly. The flame wavers, then steadies. The sea sighs, and we step forward into the world of the Roman lighthouse keeper, where time moves at a different pace, and the quiet is a living thing. The keeper's hands know the shape of every tool he owns. The oil flask, made of clay, warm from the heat of the lamp, its narrow neck worn smooth from his thumb. The iron hook he uses to trim the wick, its tip blackened and brittle. The small knife he keeps in his belt, used for cutting rope, for scraping salt from the stone, for carving small shapes into driftwood when the night grows too long. These objects are not just tools, they are companions. He names them, sometimes under his breath, a habit he picked up from an old fisherman who said everything deserves a name. The oil itself is a precious thing. Olive oil mostly, sometimes the cheaper lamponte oil pressed from damaged olives, sometimes a blend with fish oil when the supply was low. It arrived in large amphorae, carried up the tower on his back, one step at a time, a journey of 150 steps, or 200, or more, depending on the height of the lighthouse. He learned to balance the heavy jar against his hip, to pace himself, to count the steps in his mind so that he would not stumble. The smell of the oil clung to everything. His tunic, his hands, the walls of the tower. It was not unpleasant. It was the smell of safety, of duty, of the light that would not fail. He stored the oil in a small chamber at the base of the tower, a cool room with a stone floor and a single window, high and narrow, that let in a sliver of daylight. There he kept his reserve supplies, 3 or 4 amphorae of oil, a bundle of extra wicks made from flax or papyrus, a box of flints and tinder, a small cache of salted fish, and hard bread for those days when the weather kept the supply ship away. He checked the stores every morning, noted the levels, planned his consumption. It was a quiet mathematics, a geometry of survival. If the storms lasted a week, he would need this much oil per night. If the wick burned unevenly, he would need to trim it more often. If a visitor came and asked for a lamp to light his way down the cliff path, he would give them a small flask of oil, but he would mark it in his mind, subtract it from the total, adjust the ritual. The lamp itself was a simple thing in its way. A bronze bowl, wide and shallow, set on a stone pedestal. The wick floated on the surface of the oil, held in place by a small metal ring. The flame was bright, but it was not steady. It danced, flickered, leaned away from the wind that snuck through the cracks in the shutter. The keeper had learned to read the flame. A steady, tall flame meant a calm night. A low, guttering flame meant rain. A flame that leaned sharply inward meant a wind from the north. And that was the wind that brought the worst storms. He watched the flame the way a farmer watches the sky, looking for signs, for omens. And there were omens. The Romans were a superstitious people, and the lighthouse keepers were no exception. They carried small charms, amulets, tokens. A piece of coral from a distant shore, worn smooth by the sea. A coin with the image of a dolphin, tucked into the fold of a tunic. A dried seahorse, pinned above the door, believed to ward off the spirits of the drowned. The keeper might have a small figurine of Fortuna, the goddess of luck, placed on the windowsill. He might have a sprig of rosemary, which he rubbed between his fingers when he felt the weight of the silence pressing down. He believed, as many did, that the spirits of sailors who had died at sea sometimes came to the lighthouse, seeking warmth seeking light. They were not malevolent, these spirits. They were simply lost. They hovered at the edges of the darkness, barely visible, like a shimmer of heat on a stone. He would not be afraid of them. He would speak to them softly, as if to a frightened child. "You are safe here," he might say. "Rest for a while. The dawn will come." And in the morning they would be gone, and he would find a small puddle of seawater on the floor, or a shell he had not seen before, and he would nod and carry on. Sometimes the spirits were more tangible. There were stories among the keepers of lighthouses along the coast of Gaul and Britain, where the sea was wilder and the nights darker, of a woman in a wet cloak who would appear at the door, asking to come in. She was always courteous, always grateful, and she would warm her hands by the lamp and talk in a low voice about the ship she had lost, the children she had left behind. The keepers knew not to ask her name. They knew not to offer her food. They would let her stay until the first light, and then she would walk to the edge of the tower and step off and disappear into the foam. It was a story, of course, but stories, in the lonely hours, have a way of becoming true. There were living visitors, too. A merchant traveling along the coastal road, his horse tired, his provisions low, would see the light of the lighthouse and turn toward it, hoping for shelter. The keeper would welcome him if there was room, offer him a corner of the floor, a bowl of broth, a cup of wine. They would sit together in the small room, the lamp casting their shadows on the walls, and they would talk. The merchant would speak of the cities he had seen, the prices of grain and wine, the news from Rome, the latest scandal in the imperial court. The keeper would listen, grateful for the sound of a human voice, for the shape of words that were not the words of the sea. But the merchant would leave in the morning, and the keeper would be alone again. And he would find that the loneliness was worse after the visit, because he had been reminded of what he was missing. He would stand at the parapet, watching the merchant's figure shrink into the distance, and he would feel a pang, a small ache that would last until the next ship appeared on the horizon, carrying a new visitor, or until the next storm came to distract him. The storms were a kind of visitor, too. They arrived with a change in the quality of the light, a yellowing of the sky, a stillness in the air that felt like a held breath. The keeper would know, an hour or more before the first gust, that the weather was turning. He would prepare. He would close the wooden shutters, leaving only a narrow gap for the light to escape. He would check the oil supply in the lamp chamber, fill it to the brim. He would tie down any loose objects, the bucket, the rope, the spare wicks, and he would brace himself for the long night. And the storm would come. It was not a gentle thing. It was a roaring, a shrieking, a battering. The tower, built of stone and mortar, would shake, the joints straining. The sea would rise, and the spray would reach the level of the lamp, and the keeper would have to wipe the salt from the flame with a cloth again and again, his hands steady, his heart pounding. He would not think about the ships out there, the men clinging to the rigging, the women and children in the hold. He would think only of the flame, of keeping it alive, of being the one fixed point in a world that had gone mad. And when the storm passed, as all storms do, He would step out and survey the damage. A broken shutter, a knocked-over oil jar, a pool of water on the floor. He would fix what he could, note what needed to be replaced, and then he would look out at the sea, and he would see the wrecks. A shattered mast, a piece of hull, a body sometimes floating face down, the tunic billowing like a pale flower. He would feel a cold sadness then, a grief that was not personal but vast, like the grief of the sea itself. He would say a prayer, not to any god in particular, but to the air, to the water, to the memory of the lost. But most nights were not storms. Most nights were calm, and the keeper would settle into a rhythm that felt as old as the earth. He would sit on a stool by the lamp, his back against the stone wall, and he would let his mind wander. He would think about the women he had known, the ones with dark hair and dark eyes, the ones who laughed easily. He would think about the child he had left behind, a boy with his own nose and his own stubbornness, growing up in a village he would never see again. He would think about the future, which was a strange thing to think about when you were a lighthouse keeper, because the future was always the same. Another night, another lamp, another dawn. He would sometimes write, not letters exactly, but marks on a scrap of parchment, a record of the days, the winds, the ships he had seen. He would note the number of vessels that passed, the direction they were heading, the color of their sails. It was not official. No one had asked him to do it. It gave shape to the hours, a purpose beyond the keeping of the light. He would dip a reed in ink, made from soot and water, and he would scratch his observations with the care of a scholar. And then he would look at what he had written, and he would see that it was a kind of story, a chronicle of his own small life at the edge of the empire. And the empire itself was vast, and the lighthouse was a tiny part of it. But the keeper did not think about the empire. He thought about the light. He thought about the sea. He thought about the men on the ships, the ones who looked at his light and felt a flicker of hope, a certainty that they were not lost. He imagined them standing at the bow, the wind in their hair, and he imagined them saying, "There, do you see it? That is the light. We are almost home." And then the dawn would come. It came slowly at first, a grayness at the edge of the sky, a softening of the darkness. The keeper would see it, and he would feel a relief that was almost physical, a loosening of the knot in his chest. He would tend the lamp one last time, letting it burn down, letting the flame die in its own time. And then he would step out and watch the sky turn pink and gold, and he would breathe, and he would know that he had done what he came to do. He would go down the stairs, his legs tired, his eyes heavy. He would lie down on his cot, and the warmth of the sun on the stone would seep into his bones, and he would sleep. And while he slept, the sea would keep its own vigil, whispering its ancient stories to the empty air, waiting for the night to come again. But there is more to tell. There are other towers, other keepers, other nights. The lighthouses of the Roman Empire were not all the same. Some were grand, like the one at Ostia, built by the Emperor Claudius, a towering structure that could be seen for miles. Others were humble, a single room atop a rocky promontory, tended by a man who had no one to relieve him, no one to talk to for weeks at a time. The keepers themselves came from different places. Some were retired sailors, men who knew the sea and wanted to stay near it. Some were exiles, men sent to the edge of the world as punishment, their only company the flame. Some were volunteers, men who had chosen the solitude because they had no place else to go. Each one had his own story, his own reasons for being there, his own way of enduring the nights. And each one carried the same weight, the same responsibility, the same quiet fear. But they also carried something else, a kind of pride, a knowledge that they were doing something that mattered, that the light they kept was a thread that connected them to the rest of the world, a thread of fire and hope. And so the night passes. The keeper sits. The lamp burns. The sea whispers. And somewhere, out in the darkness, a ship sees the light, and the captain changes course, and the lives of 100 men are saved. The keeper will never know their names. They will never know his. But the light connects them across the distance, across the dark. And that is enough. There is a story told among the keepers of the Italian coast, passed down from one generation to the next. It is about a keeper who served at a lighthouse near the Strait of Messina, a place where the currents were treacherous, and the sea was said to be haunted by Scylla and Charybdis, the monsters of old myth. The keeper was an old man, a former sailor who had lost his leg in a storm. He limped up the stairs each night, leaning on a crutch, and he tended the light with a devotion that was almost religious. One night, a storm came, worse than any he had ever seen. The wind tore the roof off his small shelter. The sea lashed the tower, and the lamp flickered, threatened to die. The old keeper crawled to the lamp, shielding it with his body, and he saw, in the flash of lightning, a ship struggling in the waves, its mast broken, its sails in tatters. He knew he had to keep the light alive. He knew it was the only chance. He fed the lamp with his own oil, the reserve he had saved for the winter. He fed it with the oil from his own lamp below, the one he used to see by. And still the flame guttered. And then he did something that the story says was true. He cut his own arm and let his blood drip into the oil to thicken it, to feed the flame. And the light burned brightly, and the ship saw it, and the ship steered away from the rocks, and the sailors survived. The keeper did not die. He bandaged his arm, and he kept the light until dawn. And when the ship came to thank him, he said only, "I did what I had to do." The story does not say if he was rewarded or if he continued to serve. It only says that the light never went out, not that night, not any night, as long as he was there. It is a story, of course, a legend. But legends have a way of capturing the truth of a thing better than facts ever can. And the truth of the lighthouse keeper is that he would do anything to keep the light burning, not for glory, not for reward, but because the light is all there is in the darkness, and without it, the world is lost. So now, in the quiet of your own night, wherever you are, imagine the keeper. Imagine the tower, the sea, the small flame. Imagine the weight of the hours, the silence, the wind. And know that someone somewhere is keeping watch. The light is steady. The night is deep, and the dawn will come. But there is another kind of dawn, one that comes not after the night, But after a long season of solitude, a dawn that arrives in the form of a ship on the horizon, a sail catching the light of the sun. That was the dawn the keeper truly waited for, the one that broke the endless rhythm of days and nights that blurred into one another. In the quiet of his tower, he would sometimes forget what day it was, what month, what year. He would look at the notches on the wall, the marks he made each morning after the lamp was out, and he would count them, and he would realize that weeks had passed, or months, and he had not spoken a word aloud except to himself or to the flame. There was a keeper once, a man named Lucius, who served at a lighthouse near the port of Brundisium, on the heel of Italy. He was a young man, barely 30, but he looked older. The sea had weathered his face, and the solitude had deepened his eyes. He had been sent there as punishment, or so the story went. He had been a soldier, a centurion in the legions, and he had committed some offense, a quarrel with a superior, perhaps, or a failure to follow orders. The details were lost, but the result was clear. He was assigned to the lighthouse, a post that was considered a disgrace, a place where men were sent to be forgotten. But Lucius did not see it that way. He saw the lighthouse as a chance to start again, a place where his past did not follow him. The sea did not care about his rank, his mistakes, his pride. The sea only cared about the light. And so he tended it with a strange gratitude, as if the flame had saved him. He would sit by the lamp and talk to it, not as a man talks to a god, but as a man talks to a friend. He would tell it about his childhood, about the olive groves in the hills, about the girl he had loved and lost, about the battles he had fought and the blood he had seen. And the flame would flicker, and he would imagine it listening. The nights were long in Brundisium, especially in the winter, when the wind came down from the mountains, and the sea turned gray and angry. The tower was not tall, only about 40 feet, but it was solid, built of limestone blocks that had been hauled from a quarry a mile inland. The stairs were narrow and worn, and Lucius knew every step, every crack, every groove. He could climb them in the dark, his hand brushing the wall, his feet finding the familiar places without hesitation. He would carry the oil up, a heavy amphora that he had to haul with a rope, and he would fill the lamp carefully, making sure not to spill a drop, because oil was precious, and the supply boat came only once a month, and sometimes not even then. The boat was his only connection to the world. It came from the port, a small vessel crewed by 2 men who were as rough as the sea. They would bring food, oil, and sometimes a letter, though letters were rare. Lucius would read them slowly, savoring each word, and then he would read them again, and then he would fold them carefully and place them in a box he kept under his cot. He had 5 letters in that box, and he knew them by heart, but he read them anyway, because reading them made him feel less alone. One of the letters was from his mother. She wrote in a shaky hand, the ink smudged in places, and she told him about the village, about the harvest, about the neighbors. She said she prayed for him every night, and she asked if he had enough to eat, and she hoped he was warm. It was a simple letter, but it carried the weight of her love, and Lucius would hold it to his chest sometimes, as if he could feel her presence. The other letters were from old comrades, soldiers who had served with him, and they wrote about their own lives, their families, their farms. They did not mention the lighthouse or his disgrace. They wrote as if nothing had changed, as if he were still one of them. And that was a comfort in its way. But the boat did not always bring letters. Sometimes it brought nothing but silence, and Lucius would watch it disappear over the horizon, and he would feel a loneliness that was like a physical pain, a hollow ache in his chest. He would go back up the stairs, and he would tend the lamp, and he would talk to the flame, and the flame would listen, and the night would pass. There was a particular night, a night in late autumn, when the loneliness became almost unbearable. The wind had been howling for 3 days, and the sea was too rough for the boat to come. The oil was running low, and Lucius had to ration it, keeping the lamp lower than usual, hoping that the light would still be enough. He sat in the darkness of his small room below, the only light a tiny candle, and he felt the walls pressing in on him. He thought about the legions, the roar of battle, the shouts of men, the heat of the sun on his armor. He thought about the noise, the chaos, the life he had left behind. And he wondered if he had made a mistake, if he should have fought harder, if he should have begged for a different punishment. But then he heard something, a sound that cut through the wind, a sound that was not the sea. It was a voice, faint at first, then growing louder, a voice singing. It was a sailor's song, a rough tune about a woman in a port town, full of laughter and longing. Lucius stood up, his heart beating fast. He went to the door and opened it, and the wind nearly tore it from his hands. He stepped out, and he saw a small boat, battered by the waves, trying to reach the shore. The men in the boat were singing, singing to keep their spirits up, singing to fight the fear. Their light was gone, their lantern lost to the storm, but they had seen the lighthouse, and they were heading toward it, using the flame as a guide. Lucius shouted to them, but the wind carried his voice away. He ran to the base of the tower, to the small dock where the boat could land, and he waved his arms, trying to signal them. The boat came closer, the men straining at the oars, their faces pale and wet. And then one of them saw him, and he raised his hand, and he kept singing, his voice cracked but determined. And Lucius felt something break inside him, a dam of solitude that had held for months. He joined the song, his own voice rough from disuse, and he sang with them, the old tune, the words coming back to him as if he had sung them yesterday. The boat reached the dock, and the men climbed out, soaked and exhausted. They were not sailors from the supply boat. They were fishermen, caught in the storm, fleeing the open sea. They had seen the light and had made for it, not knowing if they would make it. Lucius brought them inside, gave them dry clothes, lit a fire with the last of his wood. He shared his food, the dried fish and bread, and they ate together in the small room, the wind still howling outside. They talked and they laughed and they sang again. And for a few hours, the lighthouse was not a place of solitude, but a place of refuge. They left the next morning when the sea had calmed. They thanked him, and one of them, an old fisherman with a white beard, pressed a small amulet into his hand. "It is for protection," The old man said, "The goddess of the sea, she watches over those who watch over others." Lucius took the amulet, a small carved stone, and he wore it around his neck from that day on. He never took it off, not even when he slept. And that night, after the men had gone, Lucius stood by the lamp, and he felt different. The loneliness was still there, but it was softer now, like a wound that was healing. He understood that the light was not just a beacon for ships. It was a beacon for himself, a reminder that he was not forgotten, that his presence mattered. He looked out at the sea, and he smiled, a small smile, the first in a long time. There are many such stories, small moments that break the silence of the tower. A visit from a merchant ship, a gift of wine from a grateful captain, a child's toy found floating in the waves. Each one is a thread, a connection to the world outside. And the keeper holds onto these threads, weaving them into a tapestry that keeps him sane. In the lighthouse at Ostia, the grand tower built by Claudius, the keepers had a different life. There were several of them, a team that rotated shifts, and they lived in a small compound at the base. They had a cook and a storeroom and a schedule. They could talk to each other, argue, play dice. It was a community of sorts. But even there, the nights were long, and the keepers would find their own ways to pass the time. One of them, a man named Marcus, was known for his habit of carving small figures from driftwood. He would sit by the lamp, his knife moving slowly, and he would carve ships and fish and seals. He filled the tower with his carvings, placing them on windowsills and ledges, until the place looked like a gallery of the sea. Another keeper, a younger man named Gaius, was a storyteller. He had a gift for weaving tales, and when the night was quiet, he would gather the others and tell them stories of gods and heroes, of sailors and monsters. He would act out the parts, his voice rising and falling, and the men would listen, their faces lit by the flame. The stories were old, some of them as old as Rome itself, but in the lighthouse, they felt new, as if the sea had given them life. And then there was the keeper at a small lighthouse in Gaul, a man whose name has been forgotten. He lived alone, and he had a dog, a large, shaggy creature that had wandered to the tower one day and never left. The dog was his only companion, and they would sit together, the keeper and the dog, watching the sea. The dog would bark at the waves, and the keeper would laugh, a deep, rumbling laugh that surprised him every time. He would talk to the dog, telling it about his day, his thoughts, his dreams. And the dog would listen, its head tilted, its tail wagging slowly. It was not the same as talking to a person, but it was something. The keeper in Gaul also kept a garden, a small patch of soil on the leeward side of the tower, where he grew herbs and vegetables. He tended it with care, watering it from a cistern that caught the rain. The garden was a reminder of the land, of the green world beyond the sea. He would eat the herbs in his meals, and he would dry some of them, and he would give them to the sailors who passed by. A small gift, a taste of home. All of these things, the carvings, the stories, the dog, the garden, they were ways of holding on. The sea is vast, and the night is deep, and the human heart is not built for such isolation. But the keepers found a way. They built a world within the tower, a world of small rituals and quiet joys. They learned to listen to the wind, to read the stars, to find comfort in the steady rhythm of the flame. There is a story about a keeper in Greece, a man who served at a lighthouse on the island of Samos. He was a philosopher, or at least he thought of himself as one. He had read the works of the great thinkers, and he would spend his nights contemplating the nature of the universe. He would look at the stars, and he would wonder about the meaning of life, the purpose of existence. And he would come to no conclusion, but the act of wondering was itself a comfort. He would write down his thoughts, not in a formal way, but in fragments, little pieces of wisdom that he would later share with the sailors who stopped at his tower. One night, a captain asked him, "Do you ever get lonely?" And the keeper smiled and he said, "Loneliness is a shadow. It follows you, but it cannot hurt you if you keep the light burning." The captain nodded, and he thought about those words for a long time. He repeated them to his crew, and they repeated them to others, and the story spread. And somewhere in a port town far away, a man who had never seen the lighthouse heard the words and felt a little less alone. That is the power of the keeper. Not just the light he tends, but the stories he leaves behind. They drift like seeds carried on the wind, and they take root in places he will never know. His name may be forgotten, but his presence lingers. The nights he endured, the storms he weathered, the small acts of kindness he performed, they become part of the fabric of the sea itself. So now, in the quiet of your own night, you might imagine the keepers of the Roman world. The old man in the Strait of Messina, his blood in the oil. The soldier in Brundisium, singing with the fishermen. The carver of Ostia, his hands shaping the driftwood. The storyteller, his voice rising against the wind. The man in Gaul, his dog by his side. The philosopher of Samos, his thoughts drifting like the waves. They are all there in the memory of the sea, their lights still burning, their stories still being told. And perhaps, in your own quiet moments, you can feel a connection to them. The same sea that lapped against their towers touches the shores you know. The same moon that lit their lamps shines down on you. The same wind that whispered through their broken shutters carries the scent of salt and thyme. They are not so far away, after all. They are just on the other side of the dark. So let your eyes grow heavy. Let the sound of the waves fill your mind. Let the flame of the lighthouse flicker in your imagination. The keeper is there, sitting by his lamp, his watch almost over. The sky is beginning to pale. The dawn is coming. And the light is steady, as it has always been, as it will always be. And yet, the dawn does come, as it always does. The keeper rises from his stool, his joints stiff from the long night. He stretches, his arms reaching toward the ceiling, and he feels the first warmth of the sun on his face. The lamp still burns, but its flame is pale against the growing light. He begins the ritual of extinguishing it, carefully, methodically, as he has done 1,000 times before. The oil is precious, and the wick must be trimmed. He works slowly, savoring the quiet of the morning. The birds are beginning to stir, their calls echoing across the water. The sea is calm, a sheet of silver and gold. Another night has passed. Another night of watching, of waiting, of keeping the flame alive. There is a particular keeper, a man named Titus, who served at the lighthouse in the port of Puteoli, the great harbor that fed Rome with grain from Egypt and Africa. Titus was not a young man when he took the post. He had been a sailor, a captain of a small merchant vessel that plied the routes between Ostia and Carthage. But a storm had taken his ship, and he had lost his leg, a shattered bone that never healed properly. The sea had taken his livelihood, and so he had come to the lighthouse, a place where he could still be near the water he loved. He limped up the spiral stairs every evening, his wooden leg tapping a slow rhythm against the stone. He knew every step, every worn groove in the tread. He had memorized the way the light fell through the narrow windows at different hours. He had learned the voice of the wind, how it changed from a whisper to a howl, and what it meant for the ships beyond the breakwater. Titus kept a parrot, a green parrot with a yellow head, a gift from a merchant who had sailed from Syria. The bird had learned to mimic the sounds of the port, the shouts of the dock workers, the creak of the rigging, and the ring of the bell. But Titus taught it something else. He would recite poetry, verses from the Aeneid, the part where Aeneas flees the burning city, or the lament of Dido. The parrot would listen, its head cocked, and after a while it began to repeat the lines, not perfectly, but in a garbled, sing-song way. So on quiet nights, when the wind was still and the sea was flat, Titus would sit with his parrot, and they would recite Virgil together. The bird would squawk, Arma verumt cano, and Titus would laugh, a deep, rusty laugh that came from somewhere deep in his chest. The sailors passing by would hear the strange sound, the echo of poetry from the tower, and they would smile, knowing that the keeper was there, that he was watching, and that he was not entirely alone. There were other keepers who found companionship in creatures. A man in the lighthouse at Leptis Magna on the coast of Africa kept a cat, a small gray cat that had wandered into the tower one evening, thin and hungry. The keeper fed it, and the cat stayed. It would curl up at his feet while he tended the lamp, and it would purr, a low, steady rumble that blended with the sound of the flame. The keeper would talk to the cat, telling it about the ships he could see, the weather, his thoughts. The cat would listen, its eyes half closed, and sometimes it would answer with a soft meow. It was a conversation of sorts, a gentle exchange of sounds and presence. And when the keeper died, old and gray himself, the cat was found curled on his chest, as if it had been keeping watch over him, the same way he had kept watch over the sea. Think of the keepers of the smaller lighthouses, the ones built on lonely headlands along the coast of Britannia, where the waves are cold and the fog is thick. There was a keeper there, a man named Decimus, a former legionary who had served on Hadrian's wall. He had seen enough of cold and isolation, and yet he chose the lighthouse. Perhaps he had grown used to the silence, the vast emptiness of the northern sky. He lived in a tower that was little more than a stone cylinder, with a single room at the top where the fire burned. He had to carry the wood up the steps himself, armful by armful, and the smoke would sting his eyes. But he had a small stove, and he would brew tea from herbs he gathered on the cliffs. He would sit by the fire, and he would read letters from his sister in Rome, old and yellowed, read so many times that the words were almost worn away. He knew them by heart, but he still held the parchment in his hands, as if touching the letters brought him closer to her. One winter, the fog did not lift for 30 days. The lighthouse was useless, its light swallowed by the thick gray blanket. Decimus could not see the sea, could not see the sky. He could only hear the waves pounding against the rocks below, and the cry of the gulls, muffled and strange. He stayed at the lamp, feeding it constantly, though he knew no ship could see it. It was a gesture of faith, a refusal to let the darkness win. He talked to himself, recited prayers, sang old army songs. He counted the days by making small marks on the wall with his knife. When the fog finally cleared and a pale sun broke through, he wept, not from joy, but from relief, the simple relief of seeing the world again. A ship came that very day, a trader from Gaul, and the captain thanked him for keeping the light burning even in the fog. The captain said, "We knew you were there. We could not see it, but we knew." And Decimus understood that his vigil had been seen, not by human eyes, but by something deeper, a trust that the light would be there when it was needed. The keepers also had their small superstitions, their rituals to ward off the loneliness and the fear. Some would tie a piece of red cloth to the railing to bring good fortune. Others would throw a coin into the sea at the new moon, a gift to the gods. One keeper, a Greek from the island of Rhodes, kept a small altar to Helios, the sun god, in his tower. He would offer a bit of bread and wine every evening, asking for the sun to return. He believed that the light of the lighthouse was a reflection of the sun's fire, and that by honoring the sun, he was honoring his own work. He would kneel before the altar, the lamp casting his shadow on the wall, and he would pray in a low voice, the same words his grandfather had taught him. And then he would rise, and he would tend the flame with renewed purpose. These small acts, these private ceremonies, are the threads that held the keepers together through the long nights. They are not recorded in any history. No inscription on a stone lists the prayers of the keeper of Rhodes. No official document mentions the cat of Leptis Magna. But they are there, in the texture of the past, in the accumulated weight of human endurance. Each keeper, in his own way, was a philosopher, a poet, a priest of the flame. He was not just a worker. He was a guardian of a fragile bridge between the land and the sea, between the dark and the light. And the light itself, the flame, it was not a simple thing. It required constant attention. The oil had to be pure, the wick trimmed just so. Too much oil and the flame would smoke, obscuring the light. Too little and it would gutter, flicker, die. The keeper had to find the perfect balance, a steady, clear flame that could be seen from miles away. He learned to read the flame, to know when it was hungry, when it was tired. He could tell by the color of the tip, by the way it leaned in the wind. He spoke to the flame sometimes, coaxing it, praising it. "Good fire," he would murmur, "steady now." And the flame would respond, burning bright and true, as if it understood. There is a story from the lighthouse at Messina, the one where the keeper had mixed his blood with the oil. After he died, a new keeper came, a young man from Syracuse who had no such dramatic stories. He was diligent, practical. He kept the flame burning, but he never added anything to the oil. And yet, the sailors began to notice something. They said that the light from the Messina lighthouse had a reddish tinge, a warmth that was not there before. They said it looked like a sunset, a small, steady sunset in the middle of the night. They called it the blood light, but not with fear. They said it was the old keeper's blood, still burning, still watching. The new keeper did not believe the stories, but he noticed that the flame seemed different, a little warmer, a little more alive. He did not question it. He simply tended it, and he felt a presence in the tower, a kind of second keeper, invisible but real. He would sometimes speak to the air. "I know you are here, old man. I will keep your light burning." And he felt a warmth in return, a flicker of recognition. The light of a lighthouse is not just a beacon. It is a memory. It is the accumulated watchfulness of all the keepers who have stood before it. Each one has left a trace, a residue of their attention, their hope, their fear. The flame carries that trace forward from night to night, from generation to generation. And when a sailor sees that light, he sees not just the flame, but all the hands that have trimmed the wick, all the eyes that have scanned the horizon, all the hearts that have beat in time with the waves. So, as you drift into sleep, think of the lighthouse on a distant coast, a Roman tower standing on a promontory. The wind is fresh, the stars are bright. The keeper is at his post, a small figure in the vast darkness. He is humming a tune, an old song his mother used to sing. He is thinking of nothing in particular, just the rhythm of the night, the sound of the sea, the warmth of the lamp. He is content in his own way. He knows the dawn will come, and he will sleep, and the light will be handed to another keeper, somewhere else, or to the sun itself. But for now, he is here, and the light is here, and the night is full of quiet purpose. The fire crackles, the wick tastes the oil, and the flame stands tall. It is a living thing, a companion. The keeper reaches out, his hand cupping the heat, feeling the warmth on his palm. He does not need to speak. The light speaks for him. It reaches out across the water, a long, golden finger pointing toward home. And somewhere, a sailor on a ship, weary from a long voyage, sees that finger, and he knows that he is not lost. He knows that the land is near, and that there is a safe harbor waiting. He knows that someone is watching, keeping the flame alive just for him. The keeper does not know that sailor. He will never know his name, his face, his story, but he knows him in a more profound way. He knows him as the reason for the light. He knows that without that sailor, without all the sailors, the light would be meaningless. The keeper is part of a chain, a link between the land and the sea, the day and the night, the known and the unknown. And though he stands alone in his tower, he is never truly alone. He is surrounded by all the sailors who have seen his light, and all the keepers who have lit the way before him. And so the night passes slowly, gently, like a ship sailing over a calm sea. The hours are long, but they are filled with small moments: the hiss of the lamp, the sigh of the wind, the distant call of a night bird. The keeper waits. He waits for the first light in the east, the pale streak that tells him his watch is almost over. He waits, and he tends, and he endures. It is a simple life, but it is a life of meaning. It is a life of service, of quiet duty, of love for the sea and the people who sail upon it. And when the dawn finally comes and he extinguishes the flame, he feels a sense of completion. He has done his part. The night is over, and the ships have safely passed. He descends the stairs, his steps slow and careful, and he lies down on his cot. He closes his eyes, and he listens to the sounds of the morning, the waves, the birds, the distant hum of the waking world. He is tired, but he is at peace. He has kept the light, and that is enough. Now you, too, can feel that peace. You can imagine the warmth of the lamp, the rhythm of the waves, the slow passage of the night. You can let go of your own worries, your own longings, and rest in the knowledge that someone somewhere is always watching, keeping the light burning. The world is full of unseen guardians, small flames in the dark, and you are one of them in your own way. You keep your own light, the light of your attention, your kindness, your presence. It may not be a lighthouse, but it is no less important. It guides the people around you through the dark nights of their own lives. So sleep now. Let the story of the Roman lighthouse keepers settle into your mind, a quiet reassurance that the watch never ends. The flame will still be there when you wake, and the sea will still sing its ancient song, and you will be a little more connected to all the keepers who came before and all the keepers who will come after. The light is steady. The light is eternal. And yet, even as the light is eternal, the keepers themselves were not. They came and went, each leaving a mark on the stone and the flame. Let us consider now the keeper of the lighthouse at Ostia, the port of Rome, a busy harbor where the Tiber meets the sea. The lighthouse there was not as tall as Pharaoh's, but it was important, a guiding star for the grain ships that fed the empire. The keeper was a man named Lucius, a former sailor who had lost his taste for the open sea. He had been in a storm once, a terrible storm that had shattered his ship and drowned his comrades. He alone survived, clinging to a piece of wreckage for 2 days. When he was rescued, he swore he would never sail again. But he could not leave the sea entirely. So he became a keeper, a man who watched the sea from a distance, who warned others of the dangers he had survived. Lucius was a quiet man, given to long silences. He did not hum or sing. He did not talk to the flame, simply watched, his eyes always on the horizon, even when there was nothing to see. He had a small dog, a scruffy terrier named Fidelis, who followed him everywhere. Fidelis was not a cat, but he was just as good a companion. He would sit at Lucius's feet while the keeper trimmed the wick, his tail thumping against the stone floor. He would bark at the waves, as if scolding them for their constant motion. At night, when the wind howled, Fidelis would curl up beside Lucius, a warm weight against his leg. and Lucius would stroke the dog's head and say, "We are safe here, old friend. The sea cannot reach us." But the sea could reach them in other ways. The salt air corroded everything. The brass fittings of the lamp had to be polished every day. The iron hinges of the door rusted and groaned. The wooden steps of the tower wore thin from the constant climbing. Lucius kept the tower in good repair, but it was a losing battle. Every spring, he would repaint the white plaster, and every winter, the wind would peel it away. He would fix a crack in the window, and the next storm would find another. The lighthouse was old, older than Lucius, older than his father. It had been built in the time of Augustus, and it bore the scars of every passing decade. The stones were worn smooth by the wind like old bones. The keeper loved it, not in spite of its age, but because of it. The tower had survived, just as he had survived. One night, a spring night when the air was soft and the stars seemed close enough to touch, a visitor came to the lighthouse. It was a young woman, a poet from Rome, who had heard of the lonely keeper and wanted to see the light for herself. She arrived at dusk, her cloak stained with road dust. Lucius was surprised. He did not often have visitors. The lighthouse was not a tourist attraction. It was a place of work. But he invited her in, gave her some bread and cheese, and let her sit by the lamp while he prepared for the night's watch. She asked him questions, many questions. How did he bear the solitude? Did he not miss the city, the noise, the people? Lucius shrugged. "I have the sea," he said. "I have the stars. I have Fidelis. What more do I need?" The poet looked at him, at his weathered face and his calm eyes, and she saw something she had never seen before. She saw a man who was at peace. She wrote a poem that night, sitting at the foot of the tower, the light spilling from the window above her. She wrote about the keeper, about his patient vigil, about the way the flame seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. She called him the guardian of the dark, and she said that his loneliness was not a burden but a gift, a channel through which the light could flow. The poem became famous, in a small way. It was read in the salons of Rome, and people began to think of the keeper of Ostia with a kind of reverence. But Lucius did not know about the poem. He never read it. He remained in his tower, tending the flame, watching the sea. The poet came back once, a year later, to thank him. She brought him a small bronze lamp, a gift for his vigil. She said it was a talisman, a symbol of the light within him. Lucius accepted it with a nod, and he placed it on the shelf beside his cot. He never used it. He preferred the simple oil lamp of the lighthouse, but he kept it there, a reminder that his work was seen, that his loneliness was understood. And so the years passed. The seasons turned, and the sea changed its moods. In summer, the water was calm and blue, and the ships sailed easily. In winter, the storms came, and the waves crashed against the base of the tower, sending spray up to the lantern room. Lucius would sit in his chair, Fidelis in his lap, and he would listen to the roar of the wind. He did not fear the storms. He had seen worse. He knew that the tower was strong, that the light would hold. He would check the oil, trim the wick, and wait for the storm to pass. And when it did, when the sky cleared and the stars returned, he would feel a deep satisfaction, as if he had wrestled with the elements and won. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, that Lucius once saved a ship by a single moment of attention. On a foggy night, a thick fog that swallowed the light like a hungry mouth, he heard a sound, a low rumble that did not belong to the waves. He knew that sound. It was the groan of a ship's hull, too close to the rocks. He ran to the fog bell, a large bronze bell that hung in the tower, and he rang it with all his strength. The sound carried through the fog, a deep, urgent clang. The ship heard it and changed course, just in time. The captain later came to thank Lucius, offering him a bag of gold coins. Lucius refused. "It is my duty," he said. "The light does not ask for payment." The captain insisted, but Lucius would not take the gold. He asked instead for a small thing, a bag of good olive oil for the lamp from the captain's own stores. The captain gave it gladly, and from that day on, the oil from that ship was the finest the Lighthouse ever burned. The flame seemed to burn brighter, clearer, as if the oil carried the gratitude of the captain and the crew. And the captain, he never forgot the keeper of Ostia. He told his children, and they told their children, and the story of the keeper and the fog bell became a legend in that family. They would say, "If you are ever in danger at sea, remember the keeper who asked only for oil." It is a small story, a quiet story, but it reminds us that the great acts of history are built on these small moments, these private choices. A man who refuses gold for a bag of oil. A woman who writes a poem about a lighthouse. A dog that barks at the waves. These are the threads that weave the tapestry of the past. Now, think of your own small acts. The light you keep, the kindness you offer, the attention you give. It may seem insignificant, but it is not. It is part of a larger pattern, a pattern that stretches back to the Roman keepers and forward to the keepers who will come after. You are part of the chain. And so we return to the night, to the tower, to the flame. The poet's bronze lamp sits on the shelf, gathering dust. Fidelis sleeps, his paws twitching as he chases dream rabbits. Lucius watches the horizon, his eyes steady, his hands still. The light burns, a steady, golden eye in the dark. The ships pass, unseen but guided. The sea breathes in and out like a sleeping giant. And the keeper is there, as he has always been, as he will always be. Let the image settle in your mind. The tower, the light, the man, the dog. The salt air, the creak of the lantern, the distant cry of a gull. The night is long, but it is gentle. The hours pass, and the keeper does not count them. He simply exists, a part of the rhythm of the world. He is not waiting for dawn. He is living the night, fully, completely, with every sense attuned to the present moment. And you, too, can live this night with him. You can close your eyes and feel the warmth of the lamp on your face. You can hear the waves, the wind, the soft breathing of the dog. You can let go of the day, of all its demands and worries, and sink into the quiet of the tower. There is nothing you need to do. The light is already burning. The watch is already kept. You are safe. So sleep now with the image of the Roman lighthouse keeper. Sleep with the knowledge that the light is eternal, that the chain is unbroken. Sleep and let the night carry you as gently as a ship on a calm sea. The stars are above, the flame is within, and all is well. But before you drift off completely, let me tell you one more story, a quieter one, about a keeper who came after Lucius. The years passed, and the tower stood, and the light never went out. Lucius grew old, as all keepers do. His hands became slower, his steps on the stairs more hesitant. Fidelis, too, grew old, his muzzle turning gray, his barks less frequent. And then, one autumn night, Fidelis did not wake from his sleep. Lucius found him curled in his favorite spot by the lamp, his eyes closed, his breathing still. The keeper buried him at the foot of the tower, under a patch of wild thyme. He marked the spot with a smooth white stone, and for the first time in many years, Lucius felt a loneliness that was not comfortable but sharp, a pang that cut through his calm. But he did not leave the lighthouse. He stayed, he kept the flame, and in time the loneliness softened into memory. The poet came again once more, the same poet who had written about him. She was older now, her hair streaked with silver. She found Lucius sitting by the lantern, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes on the dark sea. She sat beside him. They did not speak for a long while. Then she said, "You are still here." And he said, "The sea is still here." She nodded. She had heard about Fidelis. She had brought a small gift, a tiny clay figure of a dog painted white. She placed it on the windowsill, facing the sea. "For your friend," she said. Lucius looked at it, and his eyes grew bright, but he did not weep. He simply nodded. The poet stayed for 3 nights, and each night she watched the light, and she wrote no poems this time. She listened, and on the 3rd morning she left, and she never returned. But the clay dog remained. It sat on the windowsill, day after day, year after year, slowly fading in the salt wind. And the keepers who came after Lucius would see it, and they would ask each other, "Who left this here?" No one knew. But they did not remove it. It became part of the tower, like the worn steps and the rusted hinges. A small, quiet token of a friendship that had outlasted the people who made it. Now, think of that clay dog. How many dawns did it witness? How many storms? How many ships passed by while it stood watch on that sill? It was just a lump of fired clay, shaped by human hands, but it carried a story. Everything in a lighthouse carries a story. The stones are layered with the lives of those who built them. The wood is etched with the initials of keepers long dead. The lamp itself, polished and repolished, holds the echoes of 1,000 nights of vigilance. There is a tale, passed down among the keepers of the Roman coast, about a man named Gaius, who served at a lighthouse near Capri. He was a quiet man, a man of few words, but he had a gift. He could read the stars, not like a navigator who uses them to find direction, but like a poet who sees patterns and meanings in their arrangement. He would sit on the balcony of the lantern room, wrapped in a heavy cloak, and he would name the constellations aloud, one by one, as if greeting old friends. And sometimes, on the clearest nights, he would see a faint glow beyond the stars, a light that seemed to pulse with a slower, deeper rhythm. He called it the keeper's light, the light of all the keepers who had ever lived, burning together in the vast dark of the sky. He believed that when a keeper died, he did not vanish. He became part of that light, a tiny spark in the constellation of lanterns that watch over the world. And so, for Gaius, loneliness was an illusion. He was never alone. He was surrounded by a fellowship of light. Gaius lived to be very old. He never married. He never left the lighthouse except once a year, when a supply boat came with oil and food. He would spend a single day on the mainland, buying what he needed, and then he would return, eager to be back with his stars and his flame. The local fishermen thought him strange, even mad. They would point at the tower and say, "There lives the man who talks to the sky." But Gaius did not mind. He knew that the sky talked back in its own language, the language of light and distance. One winter, a terrible storm struck the coast of Capri. The wind was so strong that it tore the roof off a barn. The sea rose, and the waves pounded the cliff. The lighthouse tower shook. The lamp flickered. Gaius held the flame steady, shielding it with his own body if necessary. The storm raged for 3 days and 3 nights. On the 3rd night, Gaius saw something he had never seen before. A wave, larger than any wave he had ever witnessed, rose up from the darkness and loomed over the tower. It seemed to hang there, a wall of black water, for a long moment. And in that moment, Gaius did not flinch. He looked into the wave, and he thought he saw a face made of foam and spray, the face of the sea itself. But it was not angry. It was ancient. It was tired. And Gaius said aloud, "I see you. I have always seen you." Then the wave crashed down, but it broke against the tower, not destroying it, only drenching it. The lamp burned on, and Gaius felt that the sea had acknowledged him, had recognized him as a fellow watcher, a fellow keeper of the night. After the storm, Gaius was found sitting in his chair, still alive, but changed. He had a new calm, a deeper stillness. He no longer talked about the stars in the same way. He would only smile when asked. But the fishermen noticed that the light from his lighthouse seemed brighter, steadier, as if it carried a new warmth. And they felt safer sailing past that coast, even in the darkest hours. Gaius died in his sleep years later on a spring morning. The lighthouse was found lit, the lamp still burning, the wick trimmed. He was laid to rest in a small cemetery behind the tower, overlooking the sea. His grave was marked with a simple stone, etched with a single star. The keepers who followed said that on certain nights, they could still see a faint glow near his grave, a light that moved slowly, like a man pacing the shore. But you and I know that it was just the phosphorescence of the waves, or the reflection of the lamp. Or perhaps it was something else. We do not need to decide. And so the tradition continued. Lighthouse after lighthouse, keeper after keeper, flame after flame. The Roman Empire fell, but the lights did not go out. The barbarians came, and the towers were abandoned or destroyed, but the memory of the light persisted. In the Middle Ages, monks built beacons on the same cliffs, using the same stones. They lit candles in the windows of their monasteries, guiding pilgrims and fishermen. The names changed, the technologies changed, but the essence remained the same. A small flame in the dark, a human presence keeping watch. You might wonder why this matters, why we should care about a handful of obscure men and women who spent their lives in lonely towers. But think of it this way. Every light that has ever burned on a coastline was tended by someone. Every beam that cut through the fog was the result of a human hand adjusting a wick, a human eye scanning the horizon. The lighthouses themselves are monuments, but the keepers are the soul of those monuments. Without them, the stones are just stones, the lamps just glass and metal. With them, the lighthouse becomes a living thing, a heart that beats with a steady pulse. And perhaps, in your own life, you have moments of being a keeper. Perhaps you are the one who stays up late to watch over someone sick. Perhaps you are the one who keeps a small flame of hope alive in a difficult time. Perhaps you are the one who listens, who waits, who holds steady. That is the spirit of the lighthouse keeper. It does not require a tower by the sea. It only requires presence, attention, a willingness to be still. So as we draw near to the end of this night, let us remember Lucius and Gaius and the poet and the clay dog. Let us remember that the chain of keepers is unbroken and that you too are part of it. The night is not something to fear. It is a canvas for the light. And every small act of attention you offer, every moment you choose to stay watchful and kind, adds another thread to the tapestry of the world. Now the tower grows quiet. The lamp burns low but steady. The wind has fallen and the sea is calm. Far out on the water, a ship glides past, its lights dim. The keeper, whoever it is tonight, has already checked the oil, already polished the lens. He or she sits by the window, a cup of tea in hand, and watches the slow dance of the waves. The dog, or perhaps a cat, is curled nearby. The night is a soft blanket, a velvet curtain drawn over the world. You can let your eyes close now. The story is not finished, but it does not need to be. It continues in the silence, in the space between your breaths. The lighthouse is still there. The light is still burning. And you are safe, held in the gentle hands of the night. Sleep then. Sleep like the keeper after a long watch. Sleep like the sea after a storm. Sleep like the flame, resting in its glass, knowing that dawn will come in its own time. The stars are above, the flame is within, and all is well. And if you dream, dream of a tower by the sea. Dream of a winding stair, a brass lamp, a warm cloak. Dream of the sound of waves, the cry of a gull, the creak of wood. Dream of the salt air on your skin, the light on your face. And know that in that dream, you are the keeper, and the world is grateful for your watch. Good night. But perhaps you are not quite ready to sleep. Perhaps the sound of the sea is still in your ears, and you want to hear just one more story before you drift off. Very well. Let me tell you about a keeper named Marcellus, who served at a lighthouse near Ostia, the port of Rome itself. Marcellus was a young man when he first climbed the tower, barely 20 years old, with a head full of poetry and a heart full of longing. He had been a sailor once, but a storm had shattered his ship and taken his hearing. He could not hear the waves anymore, nor the cries of the gulls, nor the wind in the rigging. But he could see, and he could feel, and he could tend a flame with a steady hand. Marcellus found that silence was not an absence. It was a presence, a thick blanket that wrapped around him. In the tower, the silence was deeper than anywhere else. He could feel the vibration of the lamp's flame through the stone floor, a low hum that was not sound, but something older, something felt in the bones. He learned to read the sea by its motion, the way the light played on the water, the shifting patterns of foam. He could tell when a storm was coming by the color of the sky, the way the air pressed against his skin. He became a listener without ears. One evening, a group of senators came to visit the lighthouse. They were making a tour of the coast, inspecting the defenses, and they wanted to see the famous tower. Marcellus showed them the lamp, the polished mirrors, the great bronze gears that turned the light. The senators asked him questions, but he could not hear them. He smiled and nodded, and the captain of the guard translated. One senator, a pompous man with a loud voice, said to his companions, "What a waste! A deaf keeper. How can he hear the signals of the ships? How can he respond to danger?" Marcellus saw the man's lips move, and he understood. He did not need to hear the words. He simply looked the senator in the eye and said, in a clear voice, "I see the danger before you hear it. The sea speaks in the language of light, and I am fluent." The senators fell silent. The pompous man turned red. Marcellus turned back to his lamp and adjusted the wick. From that night on, the sailors of Ostia called him Marcello, il silenzioso, Marcellus the silent, and they trusted him more than any keeper who could hear. Marcellus kept the tower for 40 years. In all that time, he never had an accident. He never let the flame go out. He learned to recognize the lights of passing ships, the way a lantern swung in the rigging, the rhythm of a captain's signal. He could tell a Greek trader from a Roman galley just by the way its lamp flickered. He would sit in the lantern room, a notebook on his knee, and he would draw the constellations. He filled page after page with dots and lines, charts of the heavens. He believed that the stars were a map, and that if you read it correctly, you could find your way to any place in the world, even the places that did not exist on any chart. When Marcellus grew old and his hands trembled, he trained a young man named Lucius, not the same Lucius from earlier, but another Lucius, a boy from the nearby village who had been born with a stammer. Lucius could not speak clearly, but he could watch. He could listen. He fell in love with the lighthouse. Marcellus taught him everything: how to trim the wick, how to polish the brass, how to feel the vibration of the flame. He taught him to read the sea by touch, to know the direction of the wind by the taste of the salt on his lips. And on the last night of Marcellus's life, he sat beside the lamp, the boy sitting at his feet, and he wrote on a piece of parchment, "The light is not in the flame. The light is in the watchfulness. Never stop watching." Marcellus died with his hand on the lamp, the flame still steady. Lucius closed his eyes and took over. The tower never went dark, and so the chain continued. There are stories like these for almost every lighthouse along the Roman coast and beyond. In Gaul, in Britannia, in Hispania, the keepers were the same, ordinary people with extraordinary patience. They were fishermen who had lost their boats, widows who needed work, former slaves who had been given a second chance. They were people who understood that the night was not an enemy, but a companion, and that the light was not a weapon, but a hand reaching out across the water. You might ask, what did they think about those long hours alone? Some thought about home, about the family they had left behind. Some composed poems or songs in their heads. Some counted the waves, the ships, the stars. Some prayed. Some fell into a kind of trance, a waking dream in which the lighthouse became the center of the universe, a fixed point around which everything else revolved. They would talk to the lamp as if it were a living thing, a bird that needed warmth, a child that needed attention. They would polish it with rags soaked in oil, rubbing until the brass gleamed like gold, and they would whisper to it soft words that only the flame could hear. And the flame, in its way, answered. It would burn brighter, steadier, as if grateful. The keepers believed that the lamp had a soul, that it remembered every hand that attended it, every tear that had fallen into its glass. When a keeper died, they said, the lamp would flicker once, a single wink of light, and then burn on as if nothing had happened. But the next keeper would notice a difference, a subtle change in the quality of the flame, a new warmth, a deeper gold. It was the previous keeper's spirit, added to the light. This is why the ancient Romans never let a lighthouse stand empty. They understood that the light was never just fire. It was a presence. To extinguish it would be like killing a friend. Now, as we come to the end of this long night, let us imagine the last Roman lighthouse, the one that burned on the coast of Gaul, in what is now France, long after the empire had crumbled. The barbarians had come and gone. The villages were abandoned. The roads were overgrown. But the tower still stood, and the lamp still burned, because an old woman named Valeria had refused to leave. She had been a keeper for 30 years, and she said she would rather die than let the light go out. She lived alone, with a goat that gave her milk and a cat that hunted mice. She made her own oil from fish fat, because no supply boat came anymore. She kept the flame alive with her own hands, day after day, night after night. One winter, a group of Saxon raiders came ashore. They saw the light and thought it was a signal from a Roman fort. They marched toward it, weapons drawn. But when they arrived, they found only an old woman and a goat, and a lamp burning in a tower. The leader of the raiders, a man named Hrothgar, climbed the stairs and found Valeria sitting by the lamp knitting. She looked up at him and smiled. She did not scream. She did not beg. She said, in the Latin she knew, "The light is for everyone, even you." Hrothgar stared at her. He did not understand her words, but he understood her eyes. She was not afraid. She was not angry. She was just a keeper doing her work. He lowered his sword. He and his men left the tower untouched. They sailed away, and the light burned on. Valeria died the following spring. She was found with the lamp still burning, a half-finished sock on her lap. The flame flickered once, then steadied. The tower stood silent for many years. Eventually, the stones crumbled. The lamp rusted. The wind scattered the ashes. But the spot where the tower had been remained a place of peace. Fishermen would see a faint glow there on certain nights, a soft golden haze above the rocks. They called it the keeper's ghost, but you and I know that it was just the memory of light, the echo of a flame that had burned so long it left an impression on the air itself. And that is the truth of all lighthouses, Roman or not, ancient or modern. The light is never truly gone. It remains in the stories, in the dreams, in the quiet of the night. And if you listen closely, in the stillness before sleep, you can hear it. A soft hum, a whisper of flame, a voice that says, I am here, I am watching. You are safe. So now, truly, it is time to sleep. The lamp is trimmed, the wick is low. The night is deep and wide, and you are held within it. Let your thoughts drift like the tide, slow and gentle. Let your breath soften like the wind that moves the waves. You are the keeper of your own small flame, and that is enough.